While there are 4 British values, today I will look at just one, the rule of law. But what is the rule of law? Well, just as a school needs rules in order to work, the same is true for a country. In a school, the senior managers decide on the rules and all the teachers enforce them, with the headmaster deciding on more serious punishments like exclusions. In a wider country, the system is more complicated. If the law is broken, the police collect the evidence and pass the information to another organisation called the Crown Prosecution Service to decide if there's enough evidence for that person to be taken to court. And there it's decided if the person is guilty or innocent, and if they're guilty, what punishment they should receive. However, it is possible to go to court without getting the police involved. For example, in an argument over a business deal, one side could take the other to court without the police. If that person was found guilty, they'd have to pay money as compensation. They would not have to go to prison. That's all very good, but it doesn't actually explain what the rule of law is. At a very basic level, the rule of law is that a country is run according to the law, if you like, the country's rules. Now, in some schools there are clear rules and clear punishments if they're broken, while in other schools the rules and punishments are less clear, and the same applies for countries. Some are ruled more by laws than others. This does not mean that people never break the law in these countries, and this always will happen, but just that when they do, they are dealt with according to the law. When you understand the rule of law in this way, it is clear that the rule of law is not just something that a country simply has or does not have. Instead, it may be seen as a goal or aim that some countries get closer to than others. Some countries may almost have no rule of law, while others may have much more and get so close to the goal, but it's never perfect. Just as a school may have clear rules and ways of dealing with those that break them, this will never be done perfectly. The same is true of countries. When you live in Britain, it's easy to take the rule of law and the idea that rules are followed for granted. It just seems so obvious. After all, why have laws if they're not followed? However, you can think about the rule of law as a bit like clean air. You don't really think about it when you have it, but when you don't, you soon realise how important it is. In fact, Britain has a strong rule of law, and this is part of the reason that thousands of desperate people risk their lives every year to come to countries like the UK. On the other end of the scale is also one of the reasons why many of the world's super rich choose to live in the UK, more particularly London. The rule of law seems like a simple idea, that a country is run according to law. Is it all you need to know that while across the world this does not always happen, in the UK it mostly does? As you may have guessed, there's more to it than that. In fact, the rule of law has at least 3 parts to it. You need to understand each part in order to know why the rule of law is so important. The first part is that all people are treated equally before the law. There is not one law for one people and a separate one for another. If anyone breaks the law, they can expect to be punished for it in the same way as everyone else. For example, in 2003, a politician called Chris Huhne, who was a member of the government, was flashed for speeding, but his wife took the points pretending she was driving, which is of course illegal. This eventually got out in 2013 and both were jailed for it. More recently, in 2011, a politician called Lord Hanningfield stole £13,000 claiming to be staying in hotels when he was in fact at home, and was also jailed. The point is not that some politicians will break the law, but when they do, they are caught and punished just like everyone else. However, in many other countries, people are not treated equally by the law. This is particularly because judges, whose role it is to carry out the law and make sure courts run properly, as well as decide on punishments, will take money to get guilty people off. For example, in 2015, a film was made in Ghana showing judge after judge accepting money, being given bribes, to get people off after they're accused of crimes. However, the UK is generally thought to have a fair system where people are treated equally, or at least where judges do their best to be fair and can't simply be paid by those who have enough money to avoid punishments. It's difficult to know exactly how good UK judges are at treating everyone equally compared to other countries. However, countries where judges will take bribes also tend to be those where you need to give bribes to other people. For example, you may be driving along and the police stop you for speeding, even though you are not, and need to pay a bribe to avoid punishment. Or it may be that you need to pay someone to get your children into the right school you want, or to get the right treatment from a doctor, even though both should be free. Researchers have looked at all the countries in the world, giving each a score from 0 to 100, with 0 that you have to pay lots of bribes and 100 that this never happens. Britain came out well at 14 out of 180, scoring 82 out of 100, a bit behind New Zealand, which had 89 out of 100, but way better than Somalia, that only got 9. So I think we can be sure that the UK generally has judges that do their best to be fair, but this is not to say that everyone is always treated equally before the law. Before many people go to court, they are first dealt with by the police, and this is where the UK, like many other countries, still has problems. Particularly black people are 8 times more likely to be stopped and searched than whites. This is not a simple problem or easy to understand or solve, but it is an area where the country needs to improve. So in looking at this part of the rule of law, people are generally treated equally before the law, and while the system is not perfect and still needs improving, it would simply be wrong to say that Britain is just like anywhere else. As you have said, there are at least 3 parts of the rule of law, and now we'll look at the second part, that all decisions must be based on the law and not just someone's opinion. But what does this actually mean, and why is it so important? To explain, consider when someone is found guilty of beating someone up. It is a judge that decides on their punishment. However, it would not be right if it was just up to the personal opinion of the judge about what punishment a person should be given. For example, one judge may decide that beating someone up is incredibly serious and deserves a very harsh punishment, for example 5 years in prison. However, another judge may have a very different opinion. They may think that while beating someone up is clearly not okay, it is not that bad, and a small fine of say £100 would be more reasonable. This is clearly not fair. It also means that people are not treated equally by the law, and so you can see why it's so important that the law decides what happens, not just people's opinions. To stop this happening, judges are given upper and lower sentences to choose from, depending on the crime committed. So for example, if a criminal attacks someone, the punishment would depend on how bad the attack was. If the criminal just gave the person a hard shove, they would probably be charged with common assault, which has a maximum sentence of 6 months in prison. If the criminal caused the person actual harm, for example by punching them and causing bruising, they'll probably be charged with actual bodily harm and can be sentenced up to 5 years in prison. Judges do have to think for themselves in setting harsher or less tough sentences, depending on the exact crime. So in the case of assault, you may be given a lesser sentence if you had no criminal record, or were young, or admitted you were guilty, or felt you were being threatened, or having severe problems in your personal life. For this reason, it's necessary that judges do think for themselves. However, the upper and lower sentences they are given aims to make the system as fair as possible. Also, if people feel the judge is really unfair in their decision, they can ask for another judge to look at it. However, just because they ask does not mean it will always happen, though the fact that other judges may look at it is a way of stopping extremely unfair decisions being made. The idea that decisions have to be based on the law affects not just judges but also the government itself, headed by the Prime Minister. If it is thought that the law has not been followed, the government could be taken to court and may be told to change its original decision. One of the most famous cases of this happening was to do with British soldiers that come from Nepal called the Gurkhas. They were originally told by the government that after finishing in the army they could not live in the UK and would have to go back to Nepal. However, there was a big campaign for them to stay in Britain, supported by the actress Joanna Lumley, which eventually took the case to court. There it was decided that in fact the decision by the then government, led by Prime Minister Gordon Brown, did not follow the law, and in fact the soldiers should be allowed to live in the UK. So far I've looked at two parts of the rule of law: the need for the law to treat everyone equally, and then for decisions to be made in accordance with the law, not just people's opinions. Finally, we'll look at the third part of the rule of law, and that is the need for trials where it's decided if a person is innocent or guilty, to be fair. The first thing to say is in order to have a fair trial, you obviously need to have a trial in the first place, but this does not happen in all countries. For example, in the Philippines, the president has declared a war against drugs, and this has led thousands of suspects to be killed by the police without any trial. If you're accused of a crime you didn't commit, you just want to be allowed to walk free. Equally, if someone had committed a crime against you, you probably want to see that they were punished. However, as we can only have one legal system, we need a fair trial that balances the needs of both sides. The first part of having a fair trial is that people are innocent until being proven guilty. For example, if you are accused of something like theft, you would have to be found guilty in court before being sentenced. If your guilt cannot be proved, then you're free to go, because it is up to the court to prove that you are guilty. It is not up to you to prove that you are innocent. To have a fair trial, you need to be able to defend yourself, which is similar to giving your side of the argument when someone accuses you of something. To do this, you have the right to get advice from a lawyer, a person that understands the law, and will work to get you off, or if you are found guilty, to get you the smallest punishment possible. If you can't afford to pay for law yourself and face serious charges, you will be given one free of charge. As well as being given legal advice, you will also have the right to see the evidence against you, which includes the right to question witnesses saying you are guilty. Finally, for very serious crimes, for example murder, you have the right to trial by jury. This is where 12 members of the public decide if you're innocent or guilty. The right to be judged by normal people, the jury, rather than judges or other people doing legal work, is a way of helping to make sure the system is fair, as it ultimately means that the people of the country judge themselves. However, juries are only used in a very small number of very serious cases, as they cost a lot of money to run. Instead, most of the time, volunteers that are given legal training, called magistrates, decide on a person's guilt. To get a fair trial, you need to balance the needs of both sides. For this, it is assumed that people are innocent of being proven guilty, that they are allowed to defend themselves by getting help from people who understand the law, seeing the evidence against them, and in really serious cases, having right to trial by jury. So the rule of law is that a country is run according to the laws, but to understand why this is so important, you need to know exactly what this means, and as you have seen, it means at least three things. The first is that people are treated equally by the law. You would not think it was right to be punished for doing something that's okay for other people to do, but for you as a crime, because there are different laws for different people. Secondly, the rule of law means that it's the law, not people's opinions, that decide what happens. Again, you would not think it is right if someone committed a crime against you, but was given little to no punishment just because of the opinion of a judge. Equally, if you committed a crime, it would not be fair that you got a really harsh sentence based just on someone's opinion. Finally, the rule of law means you have a right to a fair trial. If you're accused of committing a crime, it is assumed you are innocent until proven guilty. You can't be punished just because you can't prove your innocence. A part of getting a fair trial, you have the right to defend yourself by getting advice from someone who knows the law and seeing and questioning the evidence against you. Also, for really serious crimes, you have a right to trial by jury. Now, while Britain has a strong rule of law, that does not mean it's perfect. Remember, the rule of law is something you aim towards, but it's never 100% right. That said, it is simply wrong to say that Britain is just like any other country in the world. Finally, when people are told about something like the British rule of law, they often say that they feel very proud. However, I'm not sure that's the right response. It was not you that created it. I think it's a much better reaction to feel grateful to live in this sort of country and a sense of responsibility for keeping the rule of law working. I think a good start in playing your part in maintaining the rule of law in this country is to understand what it means, and I hope that this talk has been a good first step in doing that. Thank you for listening. What follows now is a presentation explaining why British values are taught at schools. You may decide to use it at the beginning of this presentation, or an alternative presentation on a different British value, or you may decide to not use it at all. So what are these pictures of? The answer is they're all terror attacks. The first, often called 9/11, happened on September the 11th, 2001. Terrorists hijacked 4 planes. 2 were flown to 2 skyscrapers in New York, killing and injuring thousands. Another was flown to the US military headquarters, and the final one crashed in a field on its way to the capital city. The second happened on the 7th of July, sometimes called 7/7. 3 bombs set off in London, 2 on the Underground Railway, and 1 on a bus, shown here. The third is the Manchester Arena bombing. A single terrorist set off a bomb when people were leaving a concert. A number of people were killed and injured, more than half of them children. The final one happened about a month later at Finsbury Park in London. A single man used a van to run over people leaving a mosque. Fortunately, no one died, but a number of people were injured. These are just some examples of terror attacks. There have been others in this country as well as many abroad. So why do people commit terror attacks? This is a complicated question. Of course, different terrorists will do it for different reasons. You may think that some of these people are just filled with hate and want to hurt others. Or you may think these people are cut off from the rest of the country, and this in some way drives them to terrorism. Some are certainly suffering from mental health problems, although maybe less than you think. However, many terrorists justify their actions in the name of religion, particularly the Muslim faith. Some think they should be at war with anyone who does not practice faith in exactly the same way they do, including many Muslims. However, the large majority of Muslims do not support terror attacks, and many Muslims think that those committing terrorism are not really Muslims at all, so much that they misunderstood the religion. It should also be pointed out that terror attacks are not just committed by people claiming to be Muslims. The attack on a mosque was done by a man following groups with a hatred of foreigners, and Muslims in particular. So what can you do to prevent terror attacks? Well, there's 3 things that can be done. One is you can use the army to go into states that you think are giving base to terrorists. This is the reason why the UK, along with other countries, went into Afghanistan after September the 11th bombing. Now the war is largely over, and we only have around 1,000 soldiers left to help train the country's new army in dealing with groups supporting terrorism. However, these groups still exist in the country, and the war cost our country billions of pounds and the lives of nearly 500 soldiers. The second is you can use spies to find out and prevent terror attacks. It is often thought that the work of spies is like that of James Bond, but in truth it is hard and dangerous work and not at all glamorous. If you want to know more about it, there's a great book called Soldier Spy, written by someone working in the security services. Now both these try and stop people that decide they want to commit terror attacks. The third tries to stop them thinking it's a good idea in the first place. You can see this as a battle of ideas. The aim is to try and convince people that the principles or beliefs we have in the UK that guide us in deciding how to run the country are good ones, and better those than are based on religious violence or dislike of foreigners and Muslims. With this in mind, the government have told all schools that along with teaching pupils the subjects who will sit at GCSE, a bit of time must be given to teach those principles and beliefs that guide us in deciding how to run the country, so-called British values. Now you can argue a lot about exactly what the principles and beliefs are, but the government has split them into 4 areas: the rule of law, democracy, respect and tolerance, and individual liberty. First off, I want to start by saying that I think calling them British values can be a bit confusing and misleading. It gives the impression that Britain is the only country in the world with these ideas. This is clearly not true, as even if you look at the principle of democracy, out of only 200 countries in the world, well over half are democracies of some sort. So just because we call them British values does not mean that only Britain has them.